Hey everyone, welcome to our fourth webinar this semester. Today we are going to talk about first-time voters, and we know that some of you watching this webinar are going to be first-time voters yourselves in November, so we are really excited to talk about voting and first-time voters with you. I am Allegra Davis Hanna, and I'm just here as your host. I'm not an expert in the field. I teach English, and I'm the Humanities Department Chair.
Hi, I'm Angela Thurman, and I teach both macro and microeconomics at TCC Connect.
And I'm Misty Wilson-Mehrtens. I teach history, and I am the social sciences chair.
So they're the experts. So let's start with how a person becomes a voter in the state of Texas.
Okay, well, it's important to know that it does require action on your part. You are not automatically registered. So you have to be a registered voter in order to vote in an election. And you need to be registered prior to the election. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this. First of all, you must be 18 and you must be a U.S. citizen in order to register. If you fit those qualifications, you can register when you get your driver's license. You can also register at any post office. If you live away, so for example, say you're attending college out of state, if you're in California, but your residence is in Texas, you can register to vote absentee, even if you are out of the country. So for example, you're studying abroad and you reside in Texas, but you are currently in London, you can still vote. You just have to register to vote absentee.
What if I live in Houston and I'm going to college in Fort Worth?
If you're in Houston and you want to vote in Houston elections, like city and county, then you would need to vote absentee. But for state and national elections, you would still be able to vote.
Okay. So what can I vote for?
That's a great question. You can vote for a lot more than you think. Most people know about the biggies, like I'm going to vote for the president, I'm going to vote for the governor. But starting small, micro, and going big, you can vote for the sheriff, you can vote for city council, you can vote for mayor, you can vote for people to be on the school board. And you may say, well, I don't even care about those things. Why is that important? Each one of these offices makes decisions that affect you. So, for example, the school board, they're going to vote on how federal funds are used in your school district. They're going to vote on whether or not to levy additional taxes. So you want to have people on the school board that feel the same way as you do. Mayor, same thing. A lot of what goes on within a city. For example, if a city decides to have a special tax to use on their parks, that is something that would go through the city council and the mayor's office. And then the sheriff, think of the sheriff as basically like the police force for a county, and the sheriff is elected. So the sheriff's office, they can arrest people, they serve warrants, they do things like that. So you definitely want to vote locally. And then state, not only governor, but state representatives, agriculture secretary, railroad secretary, all of these different offices, they make decisions that affect you whether or not you realize it. And then, of course, on the national level, we've got the president, we've got the Congress, and we've got the Senate.
And I guess in some ways, the people on those smaller local elections may make decisions that have just as much impact or more on your day-to-day life than the president, right? Because the parks that I go to, the streets that I drive on, all those things are decided at a more local level, right?
Absolutely. And if you've ever driven to another city or another state, and all of a sudden maybe you notice, wow, these roads are really bad, there's a lot of potholes. Okay, that's the city. That might be the county. Or, for example, if you go somewhere and you really love, like you said, the parks are lovely. They have seasonal plantings. It's clean. They've got a dog park. That's all going to be city. So if those things are important to you, and they should be, the local elections definitely are going to affect your quality of life on a day-to-day basis.
And also right now, if you think about what we're going through, a lot of these shelter in place or stay home orders are coming from your local government, not your state or national government.
What
so those people in place absolutely matter.
Are we going through something right now?
We're going through a little thing called COVID-19.
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, and a lot, and Misty's right. I know that Dallas issued a shelter-in-place order, and that was something that was directed from the mayor's office. So, those are the kinds of things.
That's a good demonstration of how, at all levels, elected officials are impacting us, because the president makes decisions that impact the way this outbreak is being treated, but also your governor, also your senators, also your mayors. So at all levels, you see how
also your county judges, which nobody thinks about.
Yes, county judges.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing is, sheriffs also run the jails. So the way that things are being handled in county jails are decisions up to the sheriff's department. So you see how all of those people are put into a position to have a lot of power and make a lot of decisions. And we are the ones who choose who sits there, right?
Yes. That is correct. And I like to say, this is kind of a joke, but this is serious. If you don't vote, then you don't have the right to complain about the decisions they make. And that's kind of a joke, but I think that as a result of a lot of decisions that are being made with this COVID-19, for example, I just saw that they're letting out thousands of prisoners because they don't want the prisoners to be in an environment where they could spread the virus, right? So they're going to be let out. Well, some people are going to say, oh, I think that's an awesome idea. And some people might say, I think that's a terrible idea. Well, whichever way you lean, get out there and vote, because you need to make your voice heard. And Misty brought up the fact of judges. In addition, there will be things on the ballot where you're not voting for a person or an office, but you might be voting on an amendment or, for example, I mentioned earlier, a state could enact a tax of maybe a penny sales tax that would be used only within the city to, for example, build a dog park or to build a recreation center. So that is something that you would have the opportunity to vote for.
Or the Dallas Cowboys Stadium.
Exactly. So
or a bond for Tarrant County College that we all just voted on.
Exactly. And you may think that those things are not important, but what was the total bond package? Do y'all remember?
I mean, in the millions.
I think it was something like $90 million. And so, yeah, that does matter, because all of those costs tend to trickle down to everybody. So yeah, be aware of what's on the ballot, not just who is on the ballot, but what items are on the ballot. And please,
and if you don't know what's on the ballot, vote 411. If you type in your address, will tell you what's on your specific ballot for your address, but it will also give you your status, because I know a lot of our students, maybe you registered to vote when you're 18 and you haven't thought about it since.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you can check your voter status there.
Very good point.
And I will just tell you, I know this because I just did it. If you move from one place to another, but you stay in the same county, you can change your voter registration online to change your address, as long as it's in the same county. Otherwise, if you move from Tarrant County to Dallas County, you have to re-register to vote on a form and send it in. That has to be done on paper. But if you move within the same county, so if you move from one house a few streets over, you can change your address online. And of course, your address changes your precincts and all of that.
Usually change as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me, does it matter? Does it really? Like, if I just stayed home on election day, would it matter?
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you follow social media?
Yes.
A lot of people will be influenced by social media. They will let themselves be influenced by the way other people are voting. If you let someone else decide your vote, in effect, you're allowing someone else basically to vote for you, right? Then you are basically allowing perhaps a business or a country or a PR firm or a special interest group to sway the election. So yeah, your vote definitely matters. And if you don't, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, if you're not sure if votes are important, then think about why other countries and corporations spend so much money trying to persuade your vote.
True.
Right. That's
Yeah.
why that's why they launch social media campaigns with fake information or misleading information. That's why they spend lots of money in advertisements. I mean, people spend billions of dollars every year trying to get your vote or trying to change your vote, which means your vote is worth a lot of money to a lot of
That's
people.
true. Yep.
And if
you're
it
right.
weren't worth anything, they wouldn't be spending them. I mean, these are not people who just spend money for nothing. So it obviously is worth something
Right.
because people are paying a lot of money to try and convince you to vote, to try and convince you to vote for someone or someone else, or some people trying to convince you to stay home, right? People pass legislation, people spread misinformation to try and keep people from being able to vote. Also, demonstrating to you why it's so important that you vote, right? Your vote is obviously important and it matters to people. I know it feels like, what difference does it make? I'm just one person, but that's how everything works, right? Everything is an accumulation of things that makes a difference.
That's true. And if a lot of young people feel like they are not being reached out to, and one of the reasons for that is because historically they don't vote. And so that is why a lot of advertising is skewed toward the older population, because that traditionally is the population that tends to vote.
Misty, please explain to us what we're looking at here.
All right, so that is the late, great Molly Ivins. She is a Texas political writer, and her politics point of view was from a populist point of view. And she had this great quote. She said, politics is all about who is getting screwed and who is doing the screwing. So she said politics is personal. Everything in politics is personal. So when you're voting for someone, you need to look at what interest groups support them, what PACs are supporting them, how their voting record has been in the past, what issues they say that they're going to support. And then if they don't uphold that, you need to vote them out the next time.
It's a great picture.
Yeah, it's for younger days, I think, at the Tribune.
So I love the graph. Great colors. Tell me what it means.
So I'm not a political scientist. I'm a historian, but I'm going to pretend to be a political scientist here for a few minutes. Political scientists have said that we have different types of voters in this country. We have regular voters, intermittent voters, rare voters, and non-voters. So non-voters, I think, is the easiest to start with. That's 20% of our population. That is people that have not registered and never vote and never intend to.
Are these people who are, is this out of
eligible voters?
People? Okay, eligible. So anybody who could be voting, 22% of them never do.
Right.
22% never vote?
Yes.
Okay.
So rare voters are people that have registered to vote. So they did step one. And maybe they voted in that first election after that, or maybe they voted here and there, but not consistently and not very often.
Wow. Look at that. That's like 50%, almost 50% of the population either never votes or rarely votes.
Right.
Shocking.
So the next group up, your intermittent voters, these are people that are registered to vote and are likely to vote, but maybe they don't vote for local elections. Maybe they're not voting for the school board, but they're usually going to vote in the presidential election. So every 4 years at least.
Okay.
And then you have your regular voters. So these are high information, usually very politically active people who are registered to vote, and they vote consistently. So in almost every election that they can, they are casting a ballot. So that's only 35% of our population.
And just like Angie said, if I'm going to spend money to address some potential voters, if I was running for office, I think I'm most likely to try and target people who I know are regular or intermittent voters, right?
You're probably going to spend that money with either the rare voters or the intermittent voters, because your regular voters are high information voters, and most of them have already made up their minds about issues. You're not likely to sway them. But those lower two levels, you can sway them more easily.
So if I'm a regular voter, that means I'm a person who reads the news. I read about each candidate or each policy proposal, and I'm being persuaded by that, and I'm not being persuaded by Instagram commercials.
I mean, I'd like to say yes, but I believe that those are not mutually exclusive. I believe it can be influenced by both. But what you're probably going to see with the regular voters is that they live in somewhat of an echo chamber. So they maybe are very high information voters, but I get all my information from one source or one source that leans a certain way.
Right.
So high information does not always mean correct. High information just means lots of information and lots of knowledge about issues.
Okay. So yeah, you're going to target intermittent and rare voters, people who are registered to vote, people who have done it previously, but people who might have less investment, less information, and are less likely to have already made up their minds.
Exactly.
Okay. This is a crazy graph.
So it looks crazy, but it's actually exactly what you would expect. So this is who votes turnout by age. So the old saying has always been, the older you are, the more likely you are to vote, which is true. But also, we vote more in presidential elections than we do in midterms. Mm-hmm. So every time you're seeing that dip, spike, dip, you're seeing presidential election, midterm election, presidential election, midterm election. So I know it looks crazy, but it's exactly what you would expect to see.
And that is that in the last presidential election, 70% of people over the age of 60 voted. But in the last presidential election, only somewhere between 40 and 50% of eligible 18 to 29-year-olds voted.
Yep. Right. But something else I want to point out here. So usually the dip between presidential election and midterm election is pretty drastic. Mm-hmm. Look at 2012 to 2014. In all ages, that's a pretty significant drop. Mm-hmm. But from 2016 to 2018, the drop is not that high in any of the age groups.
Oh, I see.
So right now we're in a more politically charged atmosphere. More people are paying attention. More people are engaged and involved. So we should expect in 2020 to see some pretty high voting rates among all those ages.
Let's hope.
Yeah. So this is another way of looking at who is likely to vote. So we know that race is a factor in who is likely to vote, and also income. Education is another one of those factors, but education is tied very heavily to race and income, like it skews the same ways. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of redundant to have that in there as too. But what I want you to see here is that the Hispanic voting population, I know it looks low in 2012, but that's been growing every year. And both political parties have actually been targeting Hispanic voters. So in 2020, we should expect to see that rise. And we should also look at the income brackets here, because we're seeing a lot of talk around which party is supporting which group of people. And that's a motivating factor for people to go vote.
And when politicians make big appeals to the middle class and the working class, it's because there are more of them than there are of anybody else, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And look at the people that are more likely to vote. It's your middle class that makes up, because they have the most to gain or lose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So really people over 40 are an important demographic according to this, right? Because they're more likely to vote and there are so many of them.
Yeah.
But then people younger than that, it's either 50-50, voted, didn't vote, or even worse in the younger demographic. And also it doesn't appear that there are as many eligible voters in those blocks. Of course, that changes generationally. So as
and we're going to talk about that here in a minute with Gen Z. Yeah.
Okay. And this is just regional.
Yes, and this is really interesting to me. So when we talk about who votes and who doesn't, we usually take that from a national perspective. Mm-hmm. But that's not a good way to look at this. So the state with the lowest consistent voting record is Hawaii.
They're just too laid back. They're just enjoying the beach.
But our states that tend to be swing states, they are going to vote in really high numbers.
Yeah, because Minnesota.
Dang. I mean, these people know that their votes matter, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And that message is reinforced in the media. right?
Yeah.
Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, those people know that their votes matter consistently because politicians are always campaigning to them, and we hear all the time about them being swing states.
And so even if
Indiana.
you look at the southern region, the
Mhm.
4 highest voters in the southern region are states that have been called swing states.
So that's
Which does-
Maryland. It's very weird
Mhm.
that someone's calling Maryland a southern state.
I agree. Virginia, North Carolina.
North Carolina, Florida, those are obviously swing states, yeah. And then the lower end. I mean, I know a lot of people in Texas who don't vote in national elections. This is not a good practice. I'm not recommending it because they don't, because of the Electoral College, right? And I know that we've done a
Right.
webinar previously about the Electoral College, and if students want to know more, they can go back to our older webinars. But right, if I know what color my state is going to turn, does it matter if I vote?
But see, it still does, because even though we consider Texas to be a red state, it's really not. Not anymore.
It's kind of purple.
It's
And
purple.
we've got another slide. We're going to talk about, well, there's some websites that you can go to where even one vote decided an election. So yes, your vote does matter.
So if you had 51% of Democrats that turned out, you could flip Texas blue in the Electoral College. 51% of Republicans are going to keep Texas red. Texas is very much in play this year. Now, that can't be said of all of the states.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some are probably, no matter what, going to go a certain way. But that old idea of who is solid and who is not is shifting, partially because so many people are moving to Texas, and that's bringing in some new ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Building a lot of apartments, if you haven't noticed.
Yes.
Yes. No kidding.
So we know voting is important. We just all gave a little diatribe about it. So why don't people vote? What is keeping people from voting? It takes not a lot of time most of the time.
Well,
So
I think some of
go
it
ahead.
is apathy. I mean, we mentioned that earlier. People are they're just apathetic. They'll say something like, well, I don't like either one of my options, so I'm just not going to vote. So there's that apathy. So I guess that could be sort of personal choice.
Well, and for some people, that apathy is a political statement. I refuse to cast my ballot for either of these parties. I refuse to cast my ballot for either of these candidates. Now, I would still urge you to go vote and vote third party. But for some people, it is a political choice not to vote.
However, that's a cop-out because somebody's going to win. And you basically, I mean, even if you vote for I don't know the best way to say it, the least bad candidate, by at least you are expressing an opinion rather than just being so apathetic and just saying, I'm not even going to play the game. I'm not in. So you need to be in.
Another reason people don't vote is some people feel like they don't have enough information to make an informed vote. So some people want to vote, but then they feel overwhelmed and they just can't decide and they don't know where to go to get that information.
Right.
Some people have obstacles to voting. This isn't like Jim Crow South. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here is people that work maybe third shift. So they need to be sleeping when the election's going on, or people that don't have transportation to and from a polling place.
Mm-hmm.
There are places that will help you, but you have to know who those people are and how to reach them.
Yep.
For some Americans, there's no family history of voting. Maybe you don't understand how it works. Maybe you don't have anybody in your family that can help explain it to you.
Which is why we're here.
Yes. Voter suppression is another reason that some political scientists cite. That's becoming more of a talking point, and we don't have as much data on that as we would like to really say that is a huge influence. But I want it to be on people's radar because you're going to hear about it in the next election.
What is it?
So voter suppression might be things like voter ID laws, or closing down early voting, or moving voting locations to only certain neighborhoods. It's anything that's designed to lower the vote in one group or another. And then the last thing is a lack of a right to vote. So that could be an immigrant, but that could also be, in some states, somebody who's committed a felony. So when we say that everyone has the right to vote, that's mostly true, but it's not universally true.
Well, and go back to the first slide. I mean, you must be a citizen.
Right.
You must be 18.
Or, yes.
Yep. So.
And registered.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to know more about why people don't vote, there was a survey done, and the 100million.org turned it into this really nice visual graphic essay. It takes about maybe 15 minutes to go through. So if you're interested, go look at that.
So this is where we were talking about, does my vote really matter? So if you go to mentalfloss.com, so mental floss, it lists 10 elections where one vote decided the outcome. And some of these were, in the early 1900s, but some are very, very recent. And this is not just in the United States, this is all over the world. And there's even an instance, and I think it was Nevada, which is very fitting because of Las Vegas, where the two candidates were tied and they decided by picking a card. That's how the vote was decided. And that was pretty recent. So does my vote matter? Yes, it does. And the fewer people that vote, the more your vote matters, if that makes sense.
So talking about that idea, this is our last mayor election in Fort Worth. So Betsy Price, our mayor, won with 21,000 votes, which sounds like a lot, but there are 900,000 people living in Fort Worth.
Yep.
So if we add up everybody that voted in this election for all of the candidates, it's about 4% of the population of Fort Worth voted for who was going to be our mayor. So in a case like that, yeah, absolutely. Your vote is incredibly important because only 4% of the people around you are voting.
And if you think about it, those 4% of the people just decided that for you.
Exactly.
I mean, right. Betsy Price is going to be your mayor now, whether you voted or not.
Yeah, that's what I mean when I jokingly say, and if you don't like it and you didn't vote, you really don't have any room to complain. So if you want your voice heard, if you want your beliefs to be reflected, then you are bound to go and vote.
So tell me about this Generation Z situation.
So I know a lot of people think that anybody under 40 is a millennial, but that's not the case. Gen Z is below millennials. They're coming up. They are college age now. And there's actually a lot of reason to be really optimistic about Generation Z. So there was a poll done last year of freshmen entering college, and 80% of them, so first year college students, all Gen Z, said that being involved in politics is very important to them. Some said it was essential to them, and 80% of them plan to cast a ballot in 2020. Just to kind of put that in perspective for you, the last time this survey was done, when it was like the tail end of the millennials who were being surveyed, 48% of them planned to vote in an election. So doubling it.
Interesting.
Almost doubling it. My math is bad.
Yeah, your math's pretty bad.
It's real bad.
That's okay. We get the point.
So overall in the electorate, Gen Z is projected to make up a potential 35% of voters. That's incredibly high for young voters. I hope they get there. Yeah. They are considered an active generation politically just because of the events that have happened that have shaped them. And they're also more informed than the millennials were at their age, or Gen Xers were at their age. And a lot of that, again, historians and political scientists kind of debated this, but we're thinking it comes from issues about climate change, how they're going to finance their college educations, and then particularly gun violence. So things like the Parkland shooting in Florida really motivated a lot of Gen Z to get involved in politics.
Also, I don't know if this is part of the study, but we've literally been at war for their entire lives.
That wasn't in the study, but I think it's a good point. They've never known a peacetime United States.
Okay.
But that's good news, right? That they're going to vote and that they're active, and more important, that they're informed and active.
Absolutely. And for that high of a number, that young to be engaged means as they grow older and more of them become politically active, they have a potential to be a huge voting bloc.
Yeah.
And another thing that's really interesting about that group is they're less partisan than any group before them.
Yeah.
So they're less likely to say, I am a Democrat, I am a Republican, and more likely to say, here are the things I care about.
Yes, they're issue voters, not party voters. Which means if the parties want to keep them, the parties are going to have to align with the issues they care about.
Okay, so where can we get information if we are concerned about issues?
So I think the first thing you need to do is get good information, because we can go find crazy information pretty much anywhere.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of non-biased sites. And another thing, and this is what I actually encourage my students to do in my classes, if you listen to one view, then take the time to listen to the opposite view. So if you always like to follow a certain news channel, then go listen and see what the other side is saying. And there's a lot of different news sources that do this. I subscribe to one called The Flip Side, where you get views from the left, views from the right. And every single day it'll say, here's the news, here's what people on the left think, here's what people on the right think. And no matter which side that you're on, or if you're in the middle, it allows you to make your own decision, because now you've got lots of different viewpoints. And I think getting that balance is very important.
Allsides.com is a very similar type of website. And basically what it does is it takes a news story and it breaks down headlines by different organizations. So you can see the same story and then how different organizations are spinning it. And once you can see the spin, then it's easier to find the real meat of the story.
Yep. Yep. Total agree. And then the bottom line on all of these things is do some research and then make up your mind. And it's okay if you do not have the same views as your friends or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your parents. That's okay. You need to make up your own mind based on the facts, and then you go vote.
If you're having trouble figuring out like what exactly a candidate believes, because it can be confusing, especially when candidates give so many talks and there's so much media around everything that they do, the League of Women Voters does a pretty unbiased guide, and it just says the issue and then what that candidate has said on it. And so that's a really nice, easy way to break down what each candidate in a certain election is going to say are their policy positions.
Good point.
I noticed that you're advising me to use social media.
Okay, when we say follow a wide variety of people on social media, here's what I tell my students not to do. Don't take voting advice from, for example, entertainment figure. Not that those people are not well educated, but do you really want, someone who, I'm trying not to name names here.
But that's fine. I'll say it. Don't take your advice from the Kardashians.
That is exactly the thought I had in my mind. Or like your favorite rapper, or your favorite model, or fill in the blank. Because to be honest, those people probably know less about the issues than you do. So when they're getting out there going, man, you should stop supporting this gem because I don't like the guy at the top. Don't be a sheeple. Don't just blindly follow where other people lead you. You need to find people on social media that you trust, and then it's okay to look at their information. But still, I still think it's important to fact check and make up your own.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, George Clooney knows a lot about issues, and he's a very political actor, right? But that doesn't mean that if George Clooney says something, then I have to necessarily agree with it. So celebrities, including the Kardashians, are great places to get ideas or great places to maybe hear about something, but they're not great sources of information. Celebrities have opinions because they're human people, but they are not necessarily journalists, right? So they're great places to hear about things, but you have to do your own investigation. So if you follow all of your favorite musicians on Instagram and Twitter, and they start tweeting about something like recently there was somebody that a lot of celebrities were campaigning to save from an execution. You don't have to automatically agree with them because you like the way they act in movies, but you can get that information from them and then look it up somewhere else, right? It's just important that you do your own looking up and you do your own thinking, and you don't just blindly follow and forward and vote for whoever is the coolest, most popular looking person, right?
Right. But wait, be aware that a lot of those people are sponsored by
Yes.
different groups. And if someone is paying me to say something, then right away that is not balanced.
If there's an election, follow everyone running for that election. Don't
Oh,
just follow your
really?
favorite candidate. So like if we look at the primaries that have just that are wrapping up, if you're following Bernie, follow Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Because then it's a 1-for-1 comparison on issues. And you're not looking to the other side to give you the spin on what the candidate you don't like said.
Right. Well, and to be honest, you should be following Bernie, Biden, and Trump.
Well, right, but I'm talking about the primary. Yeah. So the primary is only
because
Bernie
then that way you can say, okay, well, this is what they say, and this is what I believe. Because believe it or not, no matter which side you're on, each side is going to have nuggets that you're going to go, okay, I really do like that. So it's okay. And that's the other thing. It is okay to be split on your choices. Please don't go in there and say, I am a Republican or a Democrat, and therefore I'm just going to vote for every single Republican. It is okay to vote some one, some the other. Man, maybe you want to write somebody in. Those are all perfectly fine choices.
One last piece of advice for students is that before they go vote, they should really find out their own political point of view.
Yep.
So there's a quiz you can take. It's called the Political Typology Quiz. It's real quick. It's from Pew. You go in, you take it, you answer a bunch of really quick questions, and it sort of helps you decide where you're at on the spectrum. It doesn't tell you a candidate to support. It just says this is the thing that you are most likely to care about. And then you can take that information and then apply it to elections.
Right. So that's that third link on this slide, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
All right. We have 2 more webinars coming up this semester. On April 8th, we were planning to talk about the remaining candidates in the Democratic primary. That's when we thought we would still probably have 3 or 4. And I guess we only have 2 really at this point.
But that's not the only thing that didn't work out for us this semester.
That's true.
That's true. So we will be talking about candidate coverage in April 8th, and we might change our intended focus a little bit. And on April 29th, Misty, tell us what One Nation is.
So if we watch the news, if you listen to social media, it does seem like we're a pretty divided nation. I mean, you would think that we are all at war with our neighbors all the time. But that's just not the case. Actually, there are a lot of issues that we mostly agree on. So we're going to talk about those issues and how we can become a more united country during that conversation.
Very cool. Okay. Looking forward to
one more thing. All of these were supposed to be live, but we're not allowed to come up to campus right now.
Yeah.
So it's very likely that all of the rest of these are going to have to be pre-recorded. And we're really sorry, guys. We really like interacting with you, and we really love that you guys type questions and we get to answer them live.
So I will say,
able to do it.
I will say this: we're going to have less content on April 8th than we originally planned. So we're going to take all the questions that have come up in the previous webinar response forms, and we're going to work on addressing some of those questions. So it's not a live Q&A like you might be used to, but we will. If you guys have questions about anything that's come up in the webinars this semester, type them in that form that we're about to give you a link to, and we will make sure that we address a bunch of those questions on April 8th so that you get your questions answered even if it isn't live on the air.
Perfect.
So what you've all been waiting for, how to get credit for attending. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching and listening to us as we talk about this issue. If you are in a class for which you can earn credit or extra credit, there will be a survey link in YouTube right underneath this video. The link will be there from Wednesday afternoon until Friday afternoon. So you'll have 48 hours to complete this survey. It's a brief survey. Please be sure that you include your name and the name of your instructor who sent you to this webinar, and also the section number and all the other information. That helps us get you the credit quicker. We send that information to your instructor, so you don't have to tell them, they don't have to independently verify your attendance. It'll ask you some questions to make sure that you are listening and understood, and you will have a place on that form also to tell us what questions you have that you would like us to investigate a little bit further, or to address in our next webinar. So fill out that form and let us know how we can get you the information that you need.
Perfect.
You guys have any parting words?
No, just, and also if you guys want to send any of us emails asking us for things that you would like us to cover in the future, we're always looking for new topics that are of interest to you guys. So yeah, just keep the ideas coming.
Stay home. Stay safe.
Wash your hands. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.